Cameraless photography can so often be about translation, I feel, translation and relationships. Translation being that you are taking something as simple and basic as light, and you are molding that light into shapes and forms and colors and textures to create marks on paper, and the paper reacts to this light that you're shining onto it in such a way it responds, it translates for you. It takes what you have in your mind and it reacts, it performs for you. And it takes that light, creates what you want. Then you have to consider what you have made, and then you have to sort out what the next step is going to be. What is the next shape? What is the next form? What is the position on the paper going to be? And and that's just talking about just two shapes and forms. So there's so many variables involved with those two things, getting those two basic shapes in some way connected and translating a response that you yourself wanted. Then you start adding more shapes and forms, and by the time you're in about fourth or fifth shape or form, things have a severe chance of getting out of hand, because you've got so much happening, so much to remember what is happening. It is like juggling, really, trying to keep everything up in the air. And I certainly do breathe a big sigh of relief when it comes to the end, and I know that each point is placed exactly where I need it to be. That's not quite so much what you get when you're working with in photography with a camera, because with photography with a camera, you quite often, it's all done in one shot, or maybe a long exposure shot. And with cameraless photography, when you're sitting in the darkroom or standing in the darkroom and you're building up shapes and forms, you are the master, you're in control. And that's certainly how I work, where you place one object or one form or one shape, or one tone or one texture, and then once that's placed, you then look at where you put the next one, and then where you put the next part, and then where you put the next part after that. And you build it up step by step by step, always taking everything into account as you work. So it's kind of, I always think of it like a puzzle of some kind. You're sculpting these shapes and forms to fit in with each other. And you're using your mind's eye and your intuition to decide how you are responding to each individual shape with relation to the other shapes that you're putting down on the paper. And the thing is that all of this is done in the darkroom, because the paper doesn't expose what marks you've made on it until it's gone into the developer. Then you don't know. All you've got is, you've got your mind's eye. So I find the longer I spend on a piece, the harder it gets, because you have to just keep on remembering everything that you've done up to that point, which gets harder and harder the more shapes you use. So I found that when I started working in color pieces, and I found that I started thinking of them in terms of being larger pieces, I found that the most simple approach was undoubtedly the better approach. It meant that if I relied on simple, large expanses or chunks of color and shapes and form, then putting one shape down and putting a next one to it was much easier for me in my mind's eye to figure out how they're going to react, how they make me feel, and what was really happening amongst all of them, and was I getting excited about it. And so in a strange way, the idea that I had to make these prints accessible to the large format made it much easier for me to spend time concentrating and having very specific points of where I wanted specifically to put these things. And it gave me time to consider and time to just mull everything through and make sure that the reaction I was getting from the piece, as I was anticipating where the form and where the shape and the tone and the texture was going to be, how it was going to react with everything else, whether that was the right thing to do. I suppose when painting, it's like you're pasting a mark on the canvas with your brush, and then standing back and looking at the canvas and saying, okay, I need another mark there, and marking again. Each time was considered. Each point was like a small little labour. But the advantages was that you get to end up with something that is quite simplified, but it's got this intensity of thought behind it that I found fascinating. And I find that when you see painters working, you see how they get an intensity of thought behind each individual mark that they make. And you can watch them make these marks, and it makes no sense to you really, because they're pondering over something for ages that seems quite insignificant, but then they make the mark, and it is so important to them because they've gone through the journey, and in their mind's eye they know all the stops and changes and everything, and it relates perfectly to them. And I found that that's the way that I have enjoyed working with the large colour prints. I mean, they are small colour prints when I work on them, but they have this ability to force me into being simple and simplifying the whole thing, and then getting a direct response to it and giving maybe a more positive direct message when it comes to being a bigger piece. And they transport, they translate, I mean, into such a good large print. They seem to work so well on both different scales, which I was really surprised at.